There are men who fall apart loud, they slam things, they make sure the whole neighborhood knows. I have never been that kind of man. When things break on me, I go quiet, and in 57 years of living, I've learned that quiet is almost always the more dangerous direction to travel. It just takes longer to get there. I'm standing in a parking lot on Morse Road in Columbus, Ohio, on a Wednesday afternoon in March, looking through a plate glass window at my late wife's watch, sitting in a glass case between a guitar and a row of power tools. Not just any watch, her grandmother's Elgin. A small thing, cream-colored dial, gold case worn smooth on the left edge from 8 decades of handling. Lynn wore it every day of the 29 years we were married. It's been sitting on my nightstand in the same spot since the morning I came home from the hospital without her, 6 years ago this April. My son sold it to Dave's Pawn and Loan 2 days ago for $275. I need you to understand something before I tell you what I did next. I loved that boy. I still love him, even now, even after everything. But love and protection are not the same thing, and for 2 years I confused them in a way I'm not going to be proud of for the rest of my life. Let me back this up. Let me tell you how a man ends up standing in a strip mall parking lot in March, staring at his dead wife's watch through somebody else's window. Because it didn't start with the watch. Lynn passed from ovarian cancer 6 years ago after 14 months of treatment I wouldn't wish on a stranger. Quick diagnosis, brutal fight, the kind of ending that teaches you things about a hospital's hallways you never asked to learn. If you've lost someone that way, I don't need to describe it. You already know the particular quality of silence that fills a house afterward. Not peaceful, just absent. Like the walls moved in 2 inches and nobody mentioned it. We'd built our life in a 2-story colonial off Traboo Road, the kind of neighborhood where the houses are a little tired but well loved, where everyone knows which dog belongs to which yard, where you wave at the same people every trash day for 20 years. We raised our son there, planted a garden in the back. Lynn kept a hook by the mudroom door where the Elgin came off her wrist every time she walked in, same as her shoes came off, same as the day got left outside. Her grandmother had carried the watch across from Poland in a coat pocket before the war. Lynn had it converted from pocket watch to wristwatch when she inherited it in her mid-20s. She wore it after that the way some women wear a wedding ring, not like jewelry, like skin. After she died, I put it in a small wooden box on my nightstand. Every morning I opened the box. Sometimes I didn't even take it out. I just let the light catch the dial for a few seconds. And for that much time, I wasn't entirely alone in the house. Some habits aren't really about the thing. They're about what the thing is holding for you. My son moved back home 14 months after the funeral. He was 22. Said his roommates had split. Said Columbus rent had gotten brutal. Which it had. That part was true. Said he just needed a few months to get his footing back. I said yes before he finished the sentence. He was all I had left of the family we'd built. I wasn't going to be the father who shut the door. The months stretched. 1 became 3, 3 became 8. By the time a full year had gone by, he had a part-time job at a warehouse on the south side, hours that shifted every week, and a habit of online sports betting he'd mentioned once in passing and never brought up again. I told myself he was grieving in his own direction. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself a lot of things that turned out not to be true. When the rent conversation came up, he always had a reason. Short week at the warehouse, an unexpected expense. His car needed new brakes, which it did, and which I paid for, and which I never asked him to pay back. When his checking account went negative, twice in the same month, I covered the overdraft both times and told him we'd sort it out later. We never sorted it out. I just kept absorbing, and he kept spending, and the arrangement worked fine for one of us. I've thought about why I let it go on as long as I did. I've had time to think about it. The honest answer is that I was terrified of being alone in that house. Terrified in a way I didn't have language for and didn't want to look at directly. So I paid for things I shouldn't have paid for, and I looked the other way at things I shouldn't have looked away from, and I told myself I was being a good father. What I was being was a man too scared of one kind of loss to see he was setting himself up for another. The first time I told him no, the actual first time, 18 months in, he'd asked for $1,200. Something to do with an investment opportunity with someone from the warehouse. Vague on the details, which I noted and didn't pursue. I did the math. My truck needed work. Property taxes were due. I said I couldn't do it right now. He got a look on his face I didn't recognize at first. Not hurt, not angry exactly, just flat, like a door closing. He said fine and went upstairs, and I heard his bedroom door shut and the house got very quiet. He didn't ask again. 3 weeks later, by accident, I found a piece of paper in the recycling bin. It was a handwritten IOU, a debt he owed to someone he'd gotten into it with over football bets. I stood in the kitchen holding that paper for a long time. Then I folded it up, put it in my pocket, and told myself he'd figure it out. I chose not to ask him about the betting. That was the mistake I'll carry the longest. By February, I could see it in the way he moved through the house. Restless, checking his phone constantly, the way you do when you're waiting for news you already know is going to be bad. I asked him once, flat out, whether he was okay. He said he was fine. His jaw was tight in a way I recognized from when he was 12 and didn't want to admit something scared him. I saw it. I said nothing. I should have said something. The Thursday it happened, I got home from a job around 3 in the afternoon. Light handyman work mostly now. My knees don't take the heavy jobs anymore. 22 years of plumbing will do that to you. I made a sandwich, went upstairs to change. I don't know exactly why I looked at the nightstand first. Just routine, I suppose. It's the thing I always glance at. The wooden box was sitting right where it always sits. I picked it up, too light. I opened it, empty. I put it back in the same spot, which makes no sense, but that's what I did. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall for a while. I searched everywhere, the closet, the bathroom cabinet, the fireproof box I keep documents in, every corner of the bedroom, including the ones where it could not possibly be, because the mind tries everything before it stops trying. The watch was not anywhere else. There was only one other person who lived in this house. I called him. He picked up on the second ring. I heard noise in the background, traffic, music. He was out somewhere. I said his name. I said, "Where is your mother's watch?" A pause, just long enough to mean something. He said, "What watch?" I said, "The Elgin, from my nightstand. Where is it?" Another pause. Then his voice shifted into something flat and slightly annoyed, the tone of someone who is committed to a story and is now performing it. He said he hadn't touched it. Said maybe I moved it and forgot. Said he didn't know what to tell me. He said it the way you'd respond to someone accusing you of leaving a cabinet open. Like the question itself was unreasonable. I hung up without saying goodbye. Then I sat in my truck in the driveway for 20 minutes, not going anywhere, not doing anything. Then I started driving north on Morse Road. There's a 6-block stretch up there where the storefronts run together, title loan places, a check cashing outfit, a dollar store, and 3 pawn shops I'd driven past 1,000 times without giving a second thought to. I stopped at each one that afternoon. The first 2 hadn't seen it. At the third, Dave's Pawn and Loan, I described the watch to the man behind the counter. Cream dial gold case, worn edge on the left side, crown at 3 o'clock instead of the standard position, initials engraved on the back of the case. His name was Nash. He was heavy-set 50s, wearing a Buckeyes sweatshirt, the kind of man whose face has processed enough human trouble that he doesn't show much of anything when he hears more. He didn't say anything when I finished describing it. He turned around, went to the back, and came out with a velvet tray. I put one hand on the glass counter. He said a young man had brought it in the previous afternoon. Valid Ohio ID, signed intake form. Said it was his grandmother's. He had given him $275 for it. $275. Lynn's grandmother carried that watch inside her coat across an ocean. I said, "That's my late wife's watch. My son took it out of my house." Nash's expression changed. Not surprised exactly. Just settled into something heavier. He said he believed me, but under Ohio law, if there was a dispute over ownership, he couldn't return it across the counter. It had to go on hold pending a police report and proof of ownership. He said if I had documentation to go get it and come back, he'd keep it in his safe. He said, plain as anything, that he wasn't interested in being the man who made money off something like this. I had the original appraisal Lynn's grandmother had done before she passed it along. It was in my fireproof box at home. I thanked Nash, drove home, found the appraisal, and drove back. The officer who came was calm and thorough in the way of someone who has seen most versions of most family situations. She took my statement, cross-referenced the appraisal details against the watch in Nash's hands, and filled out the hold form. Then she looked at me and asked the question I knew was coming. She said this qualified as theft under Ohio law. Depending on value and circumstances, it could carry a felony charge. She said once the process started, it didn't unwind easily. She asked if I understood that, and she asked if this was a family situation, and she asked me to think about it before I answered. I said I'd already done my thinking. She had the look then, the one that means the adult in the room is supposed to find another way. I recognized it. I'd given myself that look for 2 years. I said, "Write it up." She wrote it up. I drove home and made dinner, pasta, jar sauce, the kind of meal that requires nothing from you. I sat at the kitchen table and ate it alone and looked at the wall. Around 8 that evening, I opened Instagram. My son had posted a video 2 hours earlier. He was at a sports bar downtown with his girlfriend and a couple of her friends. Birthday celebration for someone. He was laughing at something off camera, a plate of short ribs in front of him, a drink in his hand. He looked exactly like a person who had handled his problem and was enjoying the relief of it. While I was sitting at my kitchen table with pasta and jar sauce, my son was 40 minutes away celebrating with money he'd gotten by handing his mother's watch to a stranger over a counter. I want to tell you I felt rage looking at that. I didn't. I felt something quieter than rage, something that had been building for so long it had stopped feeling like an emotion and had just become the air pressure of the room. And when I put my phone face down on the table, for the first time in 2 years, I felt that pressure shift, like a window finally opened. I washed my bowl, I went to bed, I slept better than I had in months. He came home the next morning around 11. I was in the garage reorganizing my tool chest, which didn't need reorganizing. I do that sometimes when I need to do something with my hands. He leaned in the doorway and said he'd been out late. I said, "How'd it go?" He said, "Good." Said he'd taken care of something that had been stressing him out. His voice had that particular looseness of someone who believes they've gotten away clean. I put a socket wrench back in its slot. I said, "Glad to hear it." He went back inside. He had no idea. He thought he was in the clear. The warrant processed that afternoon. They came for him the following morning at his girlfriend's apartment, where he'd spent the night. 2 plainclothes officers. Early. I wasn't there. I sat in my truck at the end of my street and waited for the call from the officer confirming it was done. The call came at 9:17 a.m. He called me from county that evening. One allowed call. His contact photo in my phone was from his college orientation 3 years back, younger, a little wide-eyed, not yet sure of himself. I let it ring 4 times. Then I picked up. He was already talking before I got the phone to my ear. I heard him say my name, heard him say they were calling it a felony, heard him say I needed to come get him and tell them I'd given him permission, tell them it was a misunderstanding. I let him finish. Then I said, "I didn't give you permission." Silence. I said, "I've known for a while you've had a problem with the gambling. I should have said something a long time ago. I didn't, and that's on me. But I'm not coming to get you tonight, and I'm not calling a lawyer." His voice went tight. He said, "I'm your son." I said, "You are. You're my son. And for 2 years I've been so afraid of losing you that I helped you become someone I don't entirely recognize. I paid for things I shouldn't have paid for. I looked away from things I should have looked straight at. I let you take from me because I didn't want to be the thing that made your life harder on top of everything else you'd already lost. And all that patience, all that understanding, all that pretending things were fine when they weren't, all it did was teach you that there was no floor, that you could keep going down and I'd always be underneath." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She would have wanted you to help me." I thought about that. I thought about Lynn. I thought about the way she handled difficult things. No performance, no drama, just direct, because she believed that the kindest thing you could do for someone was tell them the truth before the truth found its own way to them. I said, "Maybe, but she also wore that watch every day of her adult life, and you sold it for $275 because you were too ashamed to tell me the truth about what you owed. I think if she were here, she'd want me to be honest with you about that." He didn't say anything. I said, "I'll find you a public defender referral in the morning. I'll also send you the name of a counselor who works specifically with gambling. That's what I'll do. You figure out the rest." He said something then that was ugly and scared, the way people get when they're cornered and looking for something solid to push against. I let him say it. Then I said goodnight and I hung up. The consequences arrived the way they do once someone stops standing in front of them. He spent 3 nights in county before a judge set bail. Bail I did not post. His girlfriend posted half eventually. A friend covered the rest. When he got out, the warehouse had already let him go. His girlfriend lasted another 2 weeks. Then the texts from her stopped, and the calls stopped, and the silence he'd been spending 2 years running from landed back on him, quieter and heavier than anything I could have arranged. I sent him the public defender's contact information. I also sent him the name and number of the gambling counselor from the hospital's outreach program. I didn't make promises. I made the calls and sent the information and left the door unlocked, in the figurative sense. The literal door I kept the way it was. In the legal process, because I cooperated with the public defender and agreed to not pursue the maximum charge, he was able to plead down to a misdemeanor with restitution and mandatory counseling. It was not a free pass. It was not comfortable. It was not the kind of thing that wipes clean, but it left him a path that didn't dead end. 4 weeks after the arrest, he came to the house. I saw him through the front window, coming up the walk. He looked thinner, He had the look of a person who'd been sitting with themselves in an unfamiliar way and wasn't yet sure what they'd found. I opened the door before he knocked. We stood on the porch for a moment without talking. A neighbor's dog was barking at something 2 yards over. The air was cold, but not mean about it. He said he'd been going to the meetings 3 times a week. I said, good. He said he was starting to understand why he'd done it. He said he knew that didn't change what he'd done. I said it doesn't change what happened, but it might change what comes next. He looked at the door behind me. He wasn't asking to come back in, he was just there. I said, you can't move back home? That's not what this is. He nodded. I said, but if you follow through with the counseling, actually follow through, I'll be there when you're ready for the harder conversation. I'm not going anywhere. But I'm also not going back to what we were doing before. He said, okay. We stood there a moment longer. Then he said he was sorry about the watch. I said, I know. He walked back down the driveway. I watched him go all the way to his car. I didn't look away. That evening I made a real dinner for once. Not leftovers, not jar sauce. I grilled Italian sausages on the little back porch grill, the good ones from the butcher on Henderson Road, the kind Lynn used to make every 4th of July. I sat outside and ate slow, listening to the neighborhood do what neighborhoods do in the early spring evening. Somebody's sprinkler going 2 houses over. A screen door banging, kids on a driveway somewhere. When I came in, I went upstairs. I opened the wooden box. The watch was right where it belonged, exactly where I'd set it, 11 days earlier when Nash handed it back to me in a paper bag. The cream dial caught the last of the evening light coming in through the window, the same way it always had. I picked it up the way I always pick it up, both hands, careful, and for about 10 seconds the way it always is, I wasn't entirely alone. I don't know yet how the rest of this goes. I don't know if my son does the work or finds reasons not to. I don't know what the next conversation looks like or the one after that, or whether any of this cracks something open in him, the way certain things eventually cracked open in me. I'm not in the business of knowing things I can't know. What I know is that I spent 2 years trying to hold on to someone by removing every hard edge from his life. I thought if I made things soft enough, kept the consequences at arm's length, he'd stay, that he'd be safe, that I wouldn't lose him the sudden way I'd lost her, without warning, without being able to do a single thing about it. But you can't keep someone safe from becoming themselves. The most you can do is refuse to help them become someone worse. I waited too long to do that. When I finally did it, it cost us both something real. I don't have a clean way to wrap that up. What I can tell you is that I put the watch back in the box, and I closed the lid, and I set it on the nightstand in the same spot it's always been. And for the first time in 2 years, the house didn't feel like something I was just trying to get through. He sold his mother's watch for $275. He thought he'd cleared his debt and no one would ever know. He had no idea I'd already been to that pawn shop. He had no idea what was waiting. And I had no idea yet that the hardest part of all of this wasn't what I'd already done. It was what came after, the part where you finally stop catching someone. And you stand there in the silence you made and you wait and you hope that when they hit the ground, they decide to get up.